Good evening, Bermuda. This is Patrina O'Connor-Painter. Welcome you to this evening's TV Newscast as we focus on the island's largest peaceful protest of the 20th century, which culminated 40 years ago. I'm joined tonight by my co-anchor, Robbie Godfrey, here at our virtual studio, for which we owe great gratitude to none other than News.
Yes, greetings, Patrina. I'm really honored to team up with you as co-anchor this evening, as well as Teo Dill, who's our roving reporter, in this unique presentation, providing some perspective on this significant milestone.
Of course, while we're on this venture, we are looking back at our shared past. We intend to draw guidance for our community's way forward in the challenges of 2021.
100% agreed. This iconic event happened in the spring of 1981, only 3 years and a bit after the island's most violent crisis, the riot sparked by the hangings of December 1977. The Pitt Commission of 1978 had identified some of the polarizing factors that fueled that violent crisis.
With the benefit of hindsight, we have the opportunity to examine the contrasting outcomes of these two adjoining chapters of our island's story. We'll first hear from then president of the BIU, Mr. Ottawa, the renowned labor leader, who Teo is right now interviewing, so that we can offer a frame for this story.
All right, so now we are about to be graced with the performance from Bermudian actor Dion Ming, as he portrays for us the legendary Union Chief, Bermuda Industrial Union Chief, Ottawa Simmons, and his perspective on the 1981 general strike. Dion?
Good evening to our viewers. Let me assure you that you don't have to adjust your sets. This is the 80s version of Adi. I suddenly feel much fitter. I think I'll go find some mates and play a couple games of tennis. I assumed the presidency of the Bermuda Industrial Union back in 1974, humbly continuing a tradition that began with the great E.F. Gordon. I had the benefit of working through the 60s and 70s with so many committed people, including Dr. Barbara Bowl, Robert Johnson, Jean Blakeney, Sister Molly Burgess, and others. Teamwork was key in enabling us to meet those inevitable challenges, and by the time I had settled in that position, our membership had grown to more than 6,000 working people. The successful collective leverage that resulted promoted economic justice for their families directly, and arguably many others in the community benefited indirectly. However, by the end of the 70s, the phenomenon of global hyperinflation led to a reversal of progress made, challenging family budgets. I can remember back then talking to Alvin Williams, a Workers' Voice columnist, who gave me firsthand account of about his family. Alvin pointed out that although at the time he was working 3 jobs, postman, bartender at Horse and Buggy, and part-time dishwasher at Lobster Pot, he had a challenging time covering the normal expenses for his 2 daughters. Notwithstanding that type of circumstance, the government of the day stuck to their policy, ironically called fiscal responsibility. They were doing this without, in our view, truly responding to the reality of the global conditions impacting families. Consequently, when Dr. Bowl led those negotiations through many months leading up to the spring of 1981, it was no surprise that hospital and government workers voted for a strike that began on April 11th. After a week of strike action, BIU members from other sectors began to withdraw their labor in solidarity with those striking. These acts of empathy expanded as the strike continued, and there was a growing perception of government's inflexibility. While responses of solidarity by members of the union were not unexpected, this story describes some extraordinary actions by other members, non-BIU members in the wider community. These examples of out-of-the-box engagement offer guidance that may be helpful as we meet the challenges of today. The success of May 1981 in achieving a peaceful resolution to the extraordinary labor dispute was due to much more than any of the many individuals involved. A spirit of synchronicity gradually became evident across the wider community. That said, there were unfortunate, unintended consequences from which we can all learn. In the end, those and all the lessons offered by the circumstances of 1981 call us in 2021 to consider out-of-the-box approaches in addressing the small and large challenges that we are currently facing. Let's see what happens when we can get the context outside the box.
Wow, that was really moving, wasn't it?
I couldn't agree with you more.
So we'll now hear from Dale Butler in this first interview. Dale had completed a book on Dr. E.F. Gordon in 1980 and was serving as the president of the Teachers Union in 81. He'll first offer a synopsis of the transformative journey of our island in the decades following World War II. Take it away, Teo.
Now we are joined by Dale Butler, who is going to explain the foundations of the labor movement in the 40s in particular, and take us all the way through the context that was established into everything that led to the historic 81 strike. So, Mr. Butler, thank you for joining us. And what can you tell us?
Yeah, thank you, Teo, and thank you to your listening audience. I was the president of the Amalgamated Bermuda Union of Teachers in 1981. Having returned to Bermuda in 1976 and seeing so little in the curriculum on Bermudians, I undertook the task of Randolph Scott and the late Arnold Simmons to write books in any format, whether it was Gestetner or handwritten, to get the information to children. And eventually, as we grew, as students returning home, we had a couple of shillings in our pockets and could photocopy. And then I kept on coming across a lot of information about things that I had heard about Dr. E.F. Gordon. And I ended up writing the first biography of him, highlighting the formation of the Bermuda Workers Association in 1946 with outstanding community speakers and workers like Mr. Bascom, Leonard Bascom, Austin Wilson, Wycliffe Stovall, Dr. Eustace Can, Hilton Hill. All these gentlemen were fighting for change, and eventually it came together in the formation of the Bermuda Workers Association, all dealing with injustices, inequality, poor wages, poor housing. And then with the formation of that group, out came the Bermuda Industrial Union, but change didn't stop with the formation of those two groups. And it certainly didn't stop after Dr. Gordon passed in the 1950s. What happened? You then see the theater boycott in 1959. You have the formation of the Progressive Labor Party in 1965 and the Balco riots in 1965. So there's this constant thrust and quest for equality and for being accepted in the community, because Dr. Hudson had described our peculiar situation as Bermudians, Black Bermudians being first-class men, but second-class citizens. And they were attempting, with a better franchise, better working conditions and housing and education, to clearly demonstrate that they were first-class men. Be it as it may, it took the tragic 70s, especially with the assassination of the governor and his ADC, to bring about a real detailed microscopic look with the Pitt Commission, which had some very serious Bermudians on it, like Alex Scott and Walter Robinson, and a couple of overseas professors that really said, Bermuda, you have to wake up. And the island did try through a variety of things. It attempted, especially in the area of culture, of highlighting the importance of Bermudians. And then as a result, all of a sudden appeared almost out of nowhere, he was probably working quietly in the background, was Gledwin Simmons, who formed the United Cultural Committee, who had a very attractive motto, unity in the community. And as a result of that, and Glad was a very personable, charismatic type of a guy in a quiet, humble way, he was able to attract people to that movement. And as a result, he gradually became the president of the Bermuda Hospital Workers Department within the Bermuda Industrial Union. And up pops again working conditions, inequality, and wages. And what would have been an easier way to find a solution, which was found in the end after they had to go through this tragic strike, they found the solutions. But the resistance into all of these movements was constant resistance to say no almost immediately. And they found themselves up against the wall, making no progress. The union was not in the best position to sustain all of its members financially or with food, which was set up, food baskets and things like that were all set up.
An article from the January issue of the New People's Journal, published in January 1981, said high inflation in the last 2 years had left employees underwater. Forecasts confirmed more years of inflation. Pay raises would have to be extraordinary to return employees to the surface.
It was against this background that union members felt the circumstances required an extraordinary settlement, a position that the government opposed. Consequently, after protracted negotiations, a 21-day strike notice was submitted by Dr. Barbara Ball in March 1981 on behalf of hospital and government members of the BIU. That notice, involving 1,100 employees, had an April 11th deadline, which resulted in rising tension as the time ticked down.
That first week of the strike action proved to be relatively low-key, with calm picket lines at the hospitals and government premises. By April 18th, the Socialist Party set up the Striking Family Support Committee, co-chaired by Canon Thomas Nesbitt and Reverend Larry Lowe of St. Paul's A.M.E. This out-of-the-box approach invited the public to donate groceries and funds for impacted families. The reserved canon from the conservative Anglican Church balanced Reverend Larry, who was as comfortable as in a pulpit as at a standing cup match. On April 22nd, the support committee invited the community to lunchtime prayer reflection sessions in St. Paul's, responding to rising tensions. On April 26th, the jam session on behalf of families took place at Spinning Wheel, with musicians volunteering from across the island, boosting the fund to more than $7,000.
Now, Rick Richardson is working to complete a documentary on 1981 with some interviews from today and some footage of yesterday. So let's take a look at this preview of an opus that is due to be finished by the end of May.
The strike was taking place among the hospital workers and the government workers. It's two separate agreements, but they were taking place at the same time.
And we were in negotiations at the hospital, and Wood Young at that time was leading the talks on behalf of the hospital. And all of a sudden, Dr. Stubbs and Mr. Harry Vera, they just busted in the room and ordered Wood out. Come out, we want to see you now.
The government negotiating team was playing games with us. They would tell us that, oh, they've got to go see the boss and come back to us. And
the atmosphere became very toxic. The general strike was called. The people had to help people to get to the airport by private means and so forth, because the island went on a general strike. Everything shut down.
Wow, that looks to be a great work being finalized by Mr. Rick Richardson and his team. But let's continue with the timeline. On Monday, April 27th, Libby Simmons and Robbie Wilson organized their fellow BIU taxi drivers in a picket at the airport. Over the next few days, this group was joined by increasing numbers of supporters from various sectors, and a crisis mushroomed as traffic was brought to a virtual standstill by that Thursday, April 30th.
Yes, Patrina. Even the police commissioner, Penny Bean, and his deputy, Clive Donald's requests, along with the presence of police officers and members of the regiment, couldn't ease the situation. Things were on a knife edge at the airport.
Recognizing the crisis not only means danger. In this case, the unintended possibility of violence, it also refers to opportunity. By late that Tuesday, the socialists contacted stakeholders proposing a plan B. They suggested that since the Friday was May 1st, International Workers' Day, celebrating across Europe and across much of the globe, they proposed shifting the focus away from the airport with a peaceful march throughout Hamilton to mark May Day. It was recognized that diverting to Plan B would require something outside of the box. The leadership of the BUT accepted the challenge by scheduling a meeting for the afternoon of April 30th on the proposal for a one-day strike in solidarity on the next day, May Day. However, after a lengthy general meeting of teachers, in spite of resounding expressions of support for the strikers, the motion for the solidarity action was unsuccessful.
May 1st proved to be a watershed day, as documented in the May 2nd edition of the Royal Gazette. In a pre-dawn incident, a Molotov cocktail was thrown at the Hamilton police station, but thankfully it failed to ignite. That Friday morning, the courts were kept quite busy as 11 different hotels took out writs against the BIU in regard to sympathy strikes. The head of the Hotel Association, Lyndon Clay, announced that some 3,000 employees were fired for ignoring their contracts.
The upshot of May Day was a success. Through serendipity of the spontaneous, although illegal, peaceful May Day march through Hamilton, you can see that it was widely covered in the print media. RG reports a carnival-like atmosphere during the peaceful march. Upon its conclusion, the atmosphere of tension that had prevailed was noticeably diminished. Let's listen in to three of those who collaborated to make it happen. Victor Fishenden, the president of the telco members of the BIU, Glenn Butler was involved with the BUT, as well as socialist activists, along with his mate, Jerome Parent-Chief. We'll go back to Teo.
So now we get the opportunity to listen to a conversation between three people that helped launch that pivotal peaceful march on May 1st.
Listening audience, we're here, the three of us were present on May 1st, 1981, and we're talking about those days. That week of, the last week of April 1981, were challenging, very challenging, in that as the frustration rose at the strike extended, people became frustrated, and a group of taxi drivers started a picket protest at the airport. And at the airport, as you know, it's a vital link into travel in and out of Bermuda. And as the week went on, it was obvious that we needed a plan B. So some of us put out the vibe about doing a peaceful protest on that Friday, which happened to be May Day, which is International Labor Day. And there was some discussion about that. In fact, the teachers union met that Thursday evening to decide whether or not they would come out on that day. But in that event, they said no, they wouldn't come out yet. But a few of us went into town, and I remember running into Victor Fishenden. He's going to tell us what happened when we saw him on Union Square.
Yes, good evening. It was an interesting occasion because at that time, there was over 800 government workers out, and they was being affected. And as you, Brother Glenn just said, other groups were contemplating what could be done, what could we do to help. I know at telephone company, a lawsuit or an injunction was brought against telephone company, preventing us to get involved with anything. So if that was done, we decided to meet at the Victoria Park, all as many telephone workers as possible. And from that point, a decision was made, we shall go to support our workers. Because as the union motto is, says, united we stand, divided we fall. You affect one, you affect us all.
A few of us were congregated there just outside Places Cafe, in fact. And we had heard about the blockage at the airport. and that a lot of the workers were being stopped from crossing the bridge, and it seemed to be some senators looked as if it was going to be a confrontation. So a few of us decided that we needed to break it up a bit and try to calm the waters a bit, try to disperse some of that energy.
Well, you know, Derek, that the newspaper that next day, May 2nd, had an account of that march, and they actually said that the march seemed like a carnival. And the fact that it was didn't have a permit, that it was illegal, is really iconic. So that May 1st,
Absolutely.
That May 1st, 1981 was a watershed, really, and it helped to shift the energy that had been building over those weeks of frustration, normal frustration when people are out of work.
And I definitely think that was a turning point for employers to with more respect towards the unions of the country, because then they start looking at us as equal employers.
Partners.
The union had members and the employers had us as their workers. So then there was a better understanding when they sat around the negotiating table and we was asking for rights and privileges. And they had rights and privileges too as employers, but at least it brought something forward.
It was like a victory for us.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where the energy came from. I think that's where the energy came from, feeling that, you know, hey, listen, I'm in Hamilton. I'm not being knocked over the head with a mace. You know what I mean? So I think it was
it's our country. It gave us that sense that it's
it
our
kind of added
country.
to the energy. That's why we were dancing. That's why we were singing. So that was because we expected something totally different. I got to tell you that.
And as Glenn said, we walked through the streets of Hamilton and or as we now call North back of town, as we know it, and there was over 5,000 people that was on strike.
Remember that was the Friday, and by that Monday, because the teachers met again,
yes,
the teachers decided, hey, let's come out, and they informed. They sent in fact, we called Adi and let him know what was going on, and then that provided an opening for the BIU to call for the general strike.
On Sunday, May 3rd, the Socialists organised a meeting at Warwick Workmen's Club. Speakers included opposition leader Lois Brown Evans, Julian Hall, and Gladwin Simmons of the hospital workers. The BIU's main leadership were locked in negotiations. Some 1,000 people attended. On Monday, May 4th, the BUT leadership called another general meeting at Delwood School. Teo has passed BUT President K Horton, who will share some highlights of that pivotal meeting.
Everybody at the news desk, and our contributor now is Miss K Horton, who in 1981 was the immediate past president of the Bermuda Union of Teachers. And she's here, and we are grateful to receive her in this capacity to sort of provide some context as to how educators played a pivotal, a central role in building the solidarity necessary to bring about the peaceful resolution desired and required in May of 1981. So, Ms. Horton, thank you for joining us. Can you sort of lay it all out for us?
Certainly, I'll try. I'll try and talk about the involvement of our ABUT during the 1981 strike, the general strike. It's suffice to say that we started our journey on April 30th, when the ABUT, had one of two meetings at the Delwood School. The idea of this first meeting was we had tried to get our teachers to stand in solidarity with workers around the world and take an all-out day off May 1st, International Labor Day. We were unsuccessful with this. So on May 1st, we ended up in school. Well, things in Bermuda were deteriorating, and we felt compelled to take action. Many of us did. So we had a pre-meeting, and we decided, we had some very strong teachers at Warwick Secondary, strong union people. I was at Warwick Secondary at the time. We decided to get some speakers who would talk to us. One of them was my brother Randy, who was pretty influential and persuasive. During our meeting, our second meeting of May, that was Monday, May 4th, still at Delwood, we had the meeting. Randy took to his feet and spoke to the teachers, and we had a large turnout. Well, to our elation, he was successful. And when we voted, the teachers voted to come out in support of our fellow workers at the BUT, keeping in mind that many of them were our parents, who were now, two of them without jobs. For instance, if there were two hotel workers, those children had no parents working. So we felt compelled. And the other issue is that those very parents had supported us a year before during our own strike for fairer wages. So we understood. On the morning of May 5th, that was the general strike. On the morning of May 5th, we went to the Bernard's Park. That's where we met. So thankfully, we had a bunch of teachers. So it was wonderful to see so many of us turn out. Schools were closed, teachers turned out. These are teachers from public schools, of course. We had a little chat and we started making our way to Union Square. We decided that we would leave Bernard's Park and travel along Cedar Avenue. And we went all the way up Cedar Avenue, made a left onto Church Street. The reason for Church Street is because it housed so many workers from the BPSA, they were called at the time, now BPSU, and government workers hadn't made a decision to join in the overall protest. So we were hoping that our move past there would get them thinking. And so slow march past many of the government offices. We turned left onto Court Street, right onto Victoria, and into Union Square.
When the membership of the teachers voted to stage a one-day strike in solidarity on the next day, May 5th, Brother Adi was contacted immediately with that breakthrough news. With that blessing in his pocket, the BIU president had the entree to the circumstances needed. He quickly contacted the media, making a formal invitation to all of the island's unions, calling for a general strike.
In an effort to counter this invitation, the premier held his own press conference. The implications were made that teachers were risking the welfare of their students. However, educators understood that effective education considers the interest of the whole child. On that morning of May 5th, a diverse group of a few hundred teachers gathered at Bernard Park in preparation for their march to Union Square. They were especially inspired by the presence of a cadre of senior and retired educators, most notably Betty Kawley, Lorraine Fubler, and Dr. Eva Hodgson, as well as Veronica Ross.
Following the arrival of the teachers to Union Square on May 5th, the culmination in out-of-the-box fashion was the surprise arrival of the contingent of the ETSU, Belco, into Union Square in solidarity. Led by Chuck Renaud, it's important that we note the context of this highlight of that day. In 1965, the BIU had campaigned to unionize Belco against considerable resistance from the power company owners. The event ended tragically in violence, with some, especially police, seriously injured. The legacy left a sustained estrangement between the BIU and Belco. 81 brought in out-of-the-box breakthrough. Let's listen to the son of the ETSU president, Chuck's son, Gary, to tell the hot off the press story that his father shared with him as a 20-something-year-old. We'll go back to Taya.
In the book, The History of the BIU, the author, Mr. Ira Phillip, refers to the surprise entrance made into Union Square on May 5th. As the gatherers listened to various speakers, there was a sudden diversion. People actually broke down into tears of joy as they observed Chuck Renaud, president of the ESTU of Belco, leading his membership of some 260 people into Union Square. So that is an incredibly important, memorable, and distinct moment in history. Gary, what can you remember of what your dad shared with you about that iconic occasion?
Well, the lead up to that, of course, was, everybody was on edge. There was a lot of trepidation. There was a lot of fear. And he had weighed up the pros and cons of what Mr. Otto Simmons was asking. And he had resolved the fact that he and his group would march. He didn't know how many, but he knew that they were going to march to support their Union brothers. Now, this confuses a lot of people because in 1965, the ESTU was founded as a result of the BIU not getting the amount of votes to be put in. So it was confounding to people because there was no previous announcement that he was coming, Okay. I knew he was marching because we had numerous conversations, but the everyday folk did not know what was going on. So he went to Mr. Horton and said, Mr. Vorley, I believe it was, and said, we're marching, but we're not going to deplete the island of electricity or whatever, but this is important and we're going. And they went. And when they made the corner, he was not totally sure that he would be received with open arms because, there was no previous dialogue. And when everybody started to cheer and be happy, then of course the relief came in and he was ecstatic and the members were ecstatic that they were able to contribute to this in a positive way and help out the BIU and the Union brothers, because ultimately it would help them as well. Better wages, better working conditions. It helped everybody. So that's my recollection, is that he also had tears in his eyes because of the iconic moment, as you say, that was the turning point of unionism, I guess you must say, because it was, many unions, or not many, but 3 unions joined together to make that statement. So I think that was pretty significant. Yeah.
This is so awesome to see such insight and a snapshot into history. Haven't you had a wonderful time this evening? I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and thank you for tuning in to TV News Past.
And you have a happy May 5th, Bermuda.